Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. In today's lesson, we are going to discuss about costing approaches, a topic that was previously under the A2 syllabus but now has been moved to the AS. Nonetheless, I think students at both AS and A2 need to be well aware with the principles and the concepts of costing approaches because it can also feature in A2. So, when it comes to costing approaches, you are going to have two different type of questions. One of the type would be the special order, in which you will be asked to judge if the business should accept an order from a different business that is offering you a relatively lower price than what you sell in the market at. And the other scenario would be that you'll be having many products, a product portfolio, amongst which one of the products will be having a positive contribution but will be incurring a loss. And so the examiner will ask you if the business should close down this product or should it not close this product. So right now we are going to discuss about special order, which can also be termed as accept or reject. But before we move on, this is a case study that we should go through. It is always advisable that you pause this video and try to read the case on your own, because I'm going to skim it and just take out the main points. Alright, so what you need to understand about the case study is that this business was basically started as a private limited company, but then if you can see that the business model currently is of a social enterprise. Now it's very important to identify the business model because it would help you develop application. And since it is a social enterprise, your analysis or your final chain of analysis may be different than that of a normal business enterprise, because a social enterprise will not be primarily acting for profits but would rather be invested more in the social and the environmental aims. Alright, so the business social enterprise was initially financed by charities and the grant from government as well. So we can see that the government is supporting such businesses, and the government has also provided land to this business for its production facilities. And you can also see that the corporate objectives are basically categorized as environmental, and the other can be categorized as a social objective, which reinforces our concepts that they do not work primarily for profit maximization. And then you can see that you are given the business model as to what this business does. Alright, and since this question is from a paper 3, so you'll be given an entire case. So if you want, you can open the attempt of this particular paper and go through this case study on your own for even more developed application. But then again, even the passage that we have is enough, to be very honest, in order to answer a particular question that has been featured on special order costing. So you can see that now this paragraph is of extreme emphasis and we are going to discuss it. C4T has been approached by a design company in country A with a one-off special order. This company specializes in computer and phone accessories. The order is for 5,000 cases for laptops, which would be branded with the design company logo. Alright, the design company will pay $5 per case. It is very important to identify the selling price at which you are going to sell your cases to the design company. C4T sells similar cases for $7. Now, before we move on to the analysis of the table and of the values that has been given to us, I always advise my students to dig in a little deeper and try to form a chain of arguments as soon as you read a specific text. So you can see that the selling price offered by the design company is $5, whereas the selling price at which you normally sell these cases is $7. So they always would arise a problem, and the problem is that your existing customers who are paying you $7 per case might be offended when they come to know of the lower selling price that you are charging and that you are actually selling at to different businesses. And what if the same customers get angry and start to demand similar treatment, and they say that we will now only pay $5 per case as well? Now, if this happens, your profitability is going to go down the drain. Alright, because it would disturb your regular business model. Hence, the question arises, how important it is for C40 to accept this order, considering the risk it carries. The risk of existing customers knowing that you're selling this at a lower selling price. And also, this brings us to another chain of arguments, and that is that what if this business is buying from you at $5 but selling in the market at $7? Because the business is likely to know that there exists a market in which customers are readily paying $7. So the business may be discriminating prices on your behalf. And if that happens, the business may, attract your customers away from you and would be selling them at the same selling price and benefiting from it. So these are the two comments that you can even include in your answer under qualitative analysis if you want. Let's move on. C40 would need to move employees and resources from other product teams to increase capacity if the order is accepted. Now, then again, the same thing that I always urge my students, your employees are being moved. And since your employees are being moved, what do you think would be the benefit for your employees if they are now being assigned to produce additional cases specific to a design company? There may be a window, an opportunity for them to learn new skills. Because if the order for the designing company requires a different set of specifications, so this may be a kind of job rotation for them in which they will be developing their skill set as well. But whether or not the employees agree or the employees are happily, wholeheartedly accepting this move will depend much on the existing levels of motivation of employees, which seems to be absent from the case. We are not known whether the employees are currently happy in the business or not, and therefore that might be a make or break factor. Also, if the employees are going to move from other product teams towards manufacturing of this order, it is certain that the employees may take some time to settle in. And since they may take time to settle in, you cannot expect a higher level of staff productivity or quality as you begin. So there's that, and there's a qualitative discussion that brings us to the idea that the staff motivation and the staff skills and the staff taking time to learn the new job structures is going to be a very big factor into making the decision as to whether the order should be accepted or not. Alright, so let's move on. Average material and labor costs are not expected to change. What does this line mean? This means that whatever per unit cost you have, they are not going to change. So for example, if the plastic for a laptop case costs you $2 per case, so irrespective if you produce 7,000, 9,000, 12,000, 20,000, the business states that this particular amount will not change. But the total is obviously going to change, because as you increase production, the total bill is likely to change. Alright, so let's move on. The design company requires the laptop cases to be delivered during 2021. Financial and capacity data is shown in table 2. Alright, so let's move on to table 2. But before we start discussing about table 2, let's move on to the questions that are for us. So in part A, part 1, you are asked to calculate the forecast total contribution from the special order of laptop cases, which means that you are going to calculate the contribution for 5,000 units. And in part B is fairly a simple part in which it asks you to forecast the capacity utilization rate without the special order, which means that the current output would be needed in order to solve part A, part 2. And in the B part, you can see that the examiner clearly asks you that whether using your quantitative analysis and your answers that you've calculated from part A and any other information, which means your qualitative analysis, recommend whether C40 should accept the order or should it move on with the existing operations. So let's, for example, discuss this part first because it's fairly easy and is likely to take lesser time, and then we'll move on to part A, part 1 as well, before finally moving on to part B. So if you can see that the maximum capacity, the annual capacity is 12,000 and your current output of laptop cases without the special order is 9,000, which means that is your current output. So if you look at the formula for capacity utilization, it's basically the current output divided by the maximum capacity that is available in your business. So the current output that you can clearly see is 9,000 divided by the maximum or the annual capacity without the special order, that is 12,000, and you get a good answer, and that is 75%, which can be termed as the business working on optimum capacity. But then again, if you think for a moment, this is your total capacity, right? And if you were to produce the special order units, your total units would actually reach 14,000. So for your own understanding, you can calculate the new capacity utilization rate as well, and you can clearly see that it is impossible. You can clearly see that it is impossible to manufacture the 5,000 units without increasing your overall capacity, because the capacity would only limit you to 12,000, but your output along with the special order units would reach to 14,000, which means that you are going to require a bigger space, a bigger factory. So when you are going to need a bigger space or a bigger factory, this is likely to push your overheads and likely to increase your rental cost. And if this happens, then the overall attraction in accepting the special order might be limited. Because even if the contribution is positive, but you're having to see an increase in overheads, it would be of limited benefit, because it would ultimately turn into a loss, and the increased rent would have to be borne by not only the 5,000 units but the existing 9,000 units as well. So then again the question arises, how important it is for the business, for C4D, to go for this particular order. Is there a promise for a long-term contract? Is there a guarantee that the new design company is going to propose such orders in the future as well? Because we are uncertain. So is it really worth it? Let's move on to part A, part 1. Alright. So part A, part 1 asks you to calculate the total contribution. And as you know, the formula for contribution would be selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. But since it is total contribution, you can also go for the total sales revenue minus the total variable cost. So it's up to you whether you follow a total approach or you follow a per unit approach. I'm going to explain both for simplicity, and then you can see which method do you feel comfortable in. Alright, so let's go through table 2 in order to extract the values that are needed for this particular question. The special order quantity is 5,000, so you're going to remember that because it is a crucial piece of information. Alright, so you are given the existing cost structures based on the quantity of 9,000 laptop cases. So you can see that the material cost for 9,000 is 18,000 and the labor cost for 9,000 is 13,500. And one of the biggest misconceptions that students have, and the blunders, one of the bigger blunders that students commit, is to take these values as it is and then try to calculate the contribution, which can prove to be wrong because these values are not based on the special order quantity, but these values are based on your existing quantity of output, that is 9,000. So using these values as it is might not be the right way to attempt this question. So you have two different approaches to calculate the contribution in this case. It is important to also make a note of the selling price that we are going to have. So first of all, I'm going to teach you the total approach. And if you go for the total approach, first of all, what you need to calculate is the revenue that you are getting for 5,000 cases. And it's pretty simple. You can clearly see that the selling price being offered by the design company is $5, and the output or the number of laptop cases required by the design company are 5,000. So in order to calculate the revenue, you multiply the output with the selling price and you get the total revenue of 25,000. So if you talk about the formula of contribution, you are already here because you've calculated the sales revenue. Now what you need to calculate is the total variable cost. And total variable cost involves two types of cost, namely total material cost and total labor cost. Alright, so let's go for material cost. And if you want to calculate material cost, there's a pretty simple proportion method that you can apply. So you can clearly see that the cost for 9,000 cases is 18,000. So if the cost for 9,000 cases is going to be $18,000, what would be the cost for 5,000 cases? So if you cross multiply, you'll get the exact precise answer that would be the material cost for 5,000 cases. And you can clearly see that I have done some calculations in order to save time. And you are going to reach the value of 10,000 in this case. That is going to be the right answer for the material cost of 5,000 cases. So use a proportion method, cross multiply and get your answers. And you're going to use the same steps for the labor cost as well. So if we move on to the labor cost for 5,000 cases, the same structure, the same proportion technique that we used to calculate the specific material cost for 5,000 cases. So we have the labor cost for 9,000 cases, which amount to be 13,500. So using the same proportion technique, what would be the cost for 5,000 cases? And you cross multiply and you get the precise answer, and that is 7,500. So you have the material cost for 5,000 cases, which amounts to be 10,000, and you have the labor cost for 5,000 cases as well, which amount to be 7,500. You're going to add these both and you're going to get the total variable cost that was needed in this formula. So you already have the sales revenue and you can easily obtain the total variable cost. That would be 17,500. And now just for the final touches, you can clearly see that we used the total contribution formula, revenue minus variable cost. So revenue was 25,000 as calculated above, and variable cost would be 10,000 for material and 7,500 for labor. And we are going to get the final answer, that is going to be 7,500, the proposed or the forecast contribution for the 5,000 cases. Alright, so this approach is the total approach. So if you feel comfortable using this approach, that's up to you. But then again, most students prefer the per unit basis. And if you talk about the per unit basis, you're going to use this formula, that is selling price per unit, which is already given to you $5, and then variable cost per unit. Now, in order to determine the variable cost per unit, you need two things. You need to first calculate the material cost per unit, and you need to then calculate the labor cost per unit. So without further ado, let's see how can we reach that point. So we are already given the selling price for 5,000 cases, which is $5. So bingo, we have one of the things that are required in the formula. Then in order to calculate material cost for 5,000 cases, what we do is we calculate the per unit cost. And if you see that in the case study, it's clearly mentioned that average material, which means per unit material cost, and per unit labor cost are not expected to change. So your per unit cost would remain the same irrespective of the output that you're producing. So it's fairly simple now. If your total cost is this and your total units are these, in order to calculate the per unit cost, you are going to use this formula, that is total material cost divided by total output. Alright, so this is how you can calculate the material cost, and you are going to use the same structure for labor cost as well. So you're given the total labor cost and you're given the total output, you divide them and you get the total labor cost per unit. And it makes no difference if you've calculated them on a basis of 9,000 units, because the case clearly states that average material and labor cost are not expected to change. So we already have the selling price. Now we have got the material cost per unit and finally calculated the labor cost per unit as well. So in order for us to calculate the contribution per unit, we are going to use this formula. And when we use this formula, we can clearly see that we are able to calculate the per unit contribution. So selling price, that was $5 minus variable cost per unit, that was 2 plus 1.5. 2 stands for material and 1.5 stands for labor. And we have calculated the per unit contribution. And since we already have the per unit contribution now, in order to calculate the total contribution, we just need to multiply by the units of special order, which are 5,000. So we get the final answer, that is 7,500. So you can use whichever approach you feel comfortable in. Remember that you're going to get the same answers irrespective of the method you follow, and it is always advisable to show your workings and write formulas, because even if you get the final answer wrong, you're still going to be rewarded for workings if they were right, or for the formula if it was applicable and if it was right as well. And before we move on to the discussion of part B, there's another question that students ask me a lot, and that is that, sir, if we calculate our answers in these parts and the answers are wrong, will we be penalized again in part B? For example, what they mean is, let's say for example, if the question asks you to calculate the capacity utilization rate, and we now know that the current capacity utilization rate is 75%, but the student wrongly calculates the capacity utilization rate and gets an answer of 25%. Now there's a huge difference in the analysis of both the capacity levels. 75% is optimum, whereas 25% is excess. So you have a lot of unutilized resources that represent a strong opportunity cost. So your analysis, if you've calculated this value, your analysis is likely to be completely different as opposed to you getting this answer. So if you were to analyze your incorrect answer, you will not be penalized twice, and if the analysis is appropriate and right, the examiner follow something known as the own figure rule, in which you are going to get marks based on the right analysis, even if your underlying calculation answers are wrong. So do not worry about that, and do not let the stress of an incorrect calculation influence the bigger marks or the part B of your answer. Alright, so we have the contribution, and the question asks us for our final recommendation whether we should go for this special order or whether should we not go for this special order. So before we start off with the discussion, I would like to suggest the method that I ask my students to use and apply in their answers. The answer may be comprised in 3 different paragraphs. If it is up to you, if you want to write an answer in a full length without any paragraphs, it's up to you, but making paragraphs makes it easier for the examiner to identify when a new point is being introduced, and it gets easier to mark. So I would suggest, even if you do not wish to leave lines, you do not need to necessarily leave lines. You can just start off with the paragraphs by leaving some space, and then that would indicate that you are now starting off with a new paragraph and a new chain of analysis. So this paragraph can stand for the quantitative analysis, which would involve you discussing calculation figures and your answers from part A. And then this paragraph can stand for qualitative analysis, which would involve you assessing other pieces of information, that can be any. And then the final paragraph that would involve your recommendation. Now the marking for this particular question, the division of assessment skills and assessment objectives, will be as follows. So this means that 2 chain of arguments can be enough. Well, they need to be applied in the context of the case. And there's something with calculation questions, I always tell my students that application becomes easier when you're answering calculation questions, because when you're using figures from the case and try to discuss your knowledge and relate different pieces of information with the values of the tables and appendices that have been given to you, so it's pretty easy to gain the application marks. And then there are 6 marks for evaluation, which means that it would be advisable if you do not consider leaving all of the evaluation for the end. Rather, evaluate each paragraph. It's up to you whether you evaluate the chain of arguments that are mainly comprising of the benefits, or you evaluate the chain of arguments comprising mainly of the drawbacks. So evaluation done throughout, and then evaluation in the conclusion in which you are going to recommend whether C40 should accept this order or not. So let's move and begin with the quantitative analysis. So in order to discuss the quantitative analysis, you have 2 answers. Number 1, you have the answer of the capacity utilization rates, and the other answer for you is the 7500, which is the total contribution. So if you're going to discuss and if you're going to throw the line of arguments based on these values, you can clearly discuss the feasibility of accepting this project as the result in an additional contribution of 7500. But most students just stop after writing this. So once you have written that this project would offer, this option would offer, this special order would offer a positive contribution of 7500, why do you think it is important for C40, for the business, to gain this particular 7500? Why do you think this additional income would be important to a business such as C40, which is a social enterprise? So you develop a chain of arguments. But then again, in the same paragraph, you talk about the capacity utilization rates, that even if the contribution is positive, it may not be possible, considering the annual capacity, to produce these 5,000 units, and therefore there would be needed an increase in the overall factory space, which is likely to push your overheads such as rent. So the question arises, if that 7,500 will actually be that worthwhile, considering that it's increasing your overheads overall. So you are going to discuss these both chain of arguments, and you can even bring another argument if you want, but even these 2 pieces of information may be enough to suffice for the quantitative analysis in order for it to be complete. So once you're done with quantitative analysis, I would suggest you to discuss about the qualitative analysis. And during the reading part of this case study, I did mention the impact on your employees, that since they will be redeployed, they are likely to gain an opportunity to learn new skills. But then again, much depends on their motivation, and much depends on the time that they take to learn the new skills. And while you are producing these 5,000 cases, you can clearly see that you do not have capacity, and you will be needing a bigger space. So this would not only push your overheads, but it is also likely to disrupt your ability, C40's ability, the business's ability, to meet increased orders from your regular customers. And that is going to be a serious drawback, because your regular customers are the ones who have led you to this stage where you have such a well-built reputation. So what you're going to do is you're going to talk about the qualitative analysis, the chain of arguments, and as you can clearly see that these are the comments that we discussed while reading the case study. The possibility of the business buying from you at 5 and selling in the market at 7, and the existing customer is being offended with the low prices being charged by you and therefore not buying from you or demanding similar treatment. So that is pretty much all of a qualitative analysis, and you can pick any 2 points and throw a discussion, or you can even pick one point from arguments for and 1 point from arguments against, and then try to evaluate. It's up to you if you evaluate the for point or the against point. All right. So now once you're done with the qualitative and the quantitative analysis, there comes a recommendation. And in order for you to write a good recommendation, it is always important to first be clear with your opinion. So you need to mention that in conclusion, I would recommend this business to accept this order, or I would not recommend this business to accept this order. And while you're mentioning your recommendation or your train of thought, you're going to support your recommendation with the most important reason. That can be any. For example, had I been in your place, I would not recommend accepting this order. And why is that? Because there is no guarantee of future orders being brought, and the current order arrangement of 5,000 cases present a huge risk, because you cannot do it in the capacity that you have. And many people might say that, okay, fine, you are going to need a bigger space in the future anyways, so you can use it now and expand now. But even if you see that the current demand is 9,000 and the annual capacity is 12,000, so even if the demand were to increase, you are still left with a margin of 3,000 units right now. So perhaps, yes, in the near future you may need to expand, but not immediately. And since it is a social enterprise, you need to plan for your finances, because you do not operate in the same manner as a business enterprise. And finance may be a problem if the government or the international charities may not fund you. You get my point, right? So I would suggest not to follow this order, but rather focus on increasing your demand of regular laptop cases. So once you mention the most important reason, try to identify, like, why do you think C4T would need to accept this special order? To increase profitability? To improve profitability? Okay, so if you're recommending against this order, do not accept this order, fine. But then you're forgetting that the primary reason behind this decision in the first place was to improve profitability. So if you're recommending not to accept this order, fine. Then suggest other ways to improve profitability. Like, for example, focusing on developing a USP or bringing unique features, and focusing on increasing the demand of your regular customers. And perhaps that can help you improve profitability rather than going for such a risky option, considering that you're a social enterprise. All right. So this is how you solve special order questions. This is particularly important for AS since it has been moved to the AS syllabus from 2023. But this can particularly be important for A2 as well, because the examiner clearly expects students at the A2 level to be well versed with the concepts of AS. I hope this video helps. Let me know in the comments if the calculations were clear to you, and let me know in the comments if you need anything else, any assistance regarding costing questions. Thank you so much.